you should be in a place now where you've got the roads and the properties identified. Now we want to identify the population at risk. We've got this DA layer. It's quite expansive. You can see that a lot of the DAs intersect with the inundation zone, but not all of them are actually where people live. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the properties at risk layer to help whittle it down to just find the places where there are residential properties, and then select the DAs that intersect with residential properties at risk to just find, basically, to try to find the places where people live. So there's a couple steps we got to go through. The first thing that we need to do is select by attribute. So if you type in select by attribute, this will be the option that comes up. You can drag it into the model. Now, another way that you can set up these model connections, if you highlight over top of a output until you get this little finger, you can just click, and if you hold down, while you hold the click down, you can drag it and set it as an input that way. So I think that's an easy way to kind of draw things out and set things up. So just hit the auto layout, and we're going to need to specify our selection, make it a new selection, new expression. We are looking for where the zone name is equal to either multifamily residential, or is equal to zone name is equal to residential. So in a perfect analysis in the real world, you would definitely want to distinguish between these two, but for simplicity's sake, to save you all some time, we're not going to worry about that. So we'll click OK, and then remember we have to copy the feature after to make this a permanent selection. So we can drag this, input features. We'll name this residential at risk. So that is the first step. Now, I'm not going to run it at this step because you all should already know what select by attribute is going to do. So we're going to move on to the next step. The next step is an intersect. And so I'll give a more thorough and detailed explanation of what intersect actually does in lecture. But basically, it's a bit more advanced than, say, a clip, for instance. It sort of does the cookie cutter thing, but it maintains attributes. So what we're going to do is drag this over here, and then we're going to take the population data and add it to our model. So you can find it here, drag it over, and then we're going to set the residential at risk as one of the input features, and the population data as the other input feature. We'll auto layout our model. And then we've got one more step. So we're going to do something called a dissolve. Because the intersect is going to preserve the attributes of everything, but we need to condense things down a little bit. So we're going to make this as an input, and we'll double click on the dissolve to open up a dialog. And here we're going to set spatial ID. This is the unique identifier of each census dissemination area as the dissolve field. So it's going to aggregate by this, and then we'll set some statistics fields for things we want to calculate. So for households, you want to select first, and for population, you want to select first. Because again, what's happening is we are intersecting the dissemination areas with all the different properties. So we're ending up with repeating DAs because we're splitting them by properties. Dissolve is sort of stitching all that back together. So we're going to click one more. We're going to set zone name. And with this, what we're going to do is we're going to select count. So this is going to tell us the total number of residential properties within each DA. And so we click OK, we auto layout, and let's add both the intersect output to the display and the final output to display. And we'll rename this. We're not going to call it residential at risk intersect. We will say population at risk. Click OK. Let's click run, see what happens. Now we've got this whole string of things set together, but it still runs pretty quickly, which is nice. So we see that the population at risk is added, as well as the residential at risk intersect. So let's turn off all the other layers, turn the map on, and look and see what the output is. So turn the roads off too, just zoom in. So this is the output of the intersect right here, what we're looking at. And so you can see that each individual property is maintained, and we can see that the should have a spatial ID 59 da, 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 da. So that's reflective of the dissemination area. So this one has a spatial ID of 5904 whatever. This one also has the same spatial ID, right? So these are two separate features, but note they have the same spatial ID. They have the same population and households, right? And so there's some double counting going on. And that's why in the dissolve step here, we select first for these, because we're not trying to sum based on that. We'd end up with an overcount. Now, if we turn this layer off and we turn the population at risk on, it's no longer splitting by properties, it's just by dissemination area. So you see that an individual DA lights up, all the properties that are within that light up, right? So this will give us a more accurate estimate of the total population at risk. If you open the attribute table, you can see that we've got, yes, 11 rows. We've got 11 rows that are selected. So there's 11 dissemination areas that have any residential properties in them. And it ranges from this one, which just has one property and just a sliver of one at that, all the way to this one, which has 222 properties. And so the number of households in a given DA is going to really be the determinant of how many people are actually in there. So we're going to do one last step here. And we can do this in our model. I guess it's two last steps. We are going to add a field. Name it pop at risk. And we'll set it to a double. Click OK. Now we can calculate the field. Drag this over. Set this as the input. So we'll set pop at risk, and we'll create an expression here where the total number of households, it's going to be this count zone name. So that's the total number of properties per DA that are at risk. We'll say this is going to be assumed to be equivalent to an average household. So the total number of households in here, each individual one that was counted is going to be a household. We're going to multiply that by the average size of a household per DA. And the way we can calculate that is just take the population for each DA and divide it by the number of households for each DA. So click OK, auto fit the layout, and we can click run. Close this, open the attribute table for population at risk. And now we've got that column, right? so we can sort it. And so remember that point that I said in lecture about populations can't really be decimals. You can't have fractions of people, but this is just an estimate. So it's okay to have fractions. And if we want to calculate the statistics, we could get the sum to figure out the total number of estimated people. And so if you're going to give a quote for this estimate, you would just want to round